I think it's, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, it's Tertullian, isn't it, who says something like, it's variously translated, credo quia absurdum, that the very improbability of the thing, the very unlikelihood of it, the unlikelihood that anyone would fabricate such a thing, for example, that a Jew could be brought to believe something so extraordinary, is testimony to its truth. I'm sure there can't be anyone who doesn't think that's a little too easy, a little too facile. I myself, for example, have followed the career of a woman known vulgarly in the media as Mother Teresa, an Albanian named Agnes Bujashu, a Catholic fanatic operating in the greater Calcutta area. And I watched every stage of her career as a candidate for, and then the recipient of, beatification and shortly canonization. The canonization will require, and as the Vatican demands, the attestation of a miracle performed by her posthumous intercession. And the miracle's already been announced. A woman in Bengal, fortunately already a devout Catholic, by pressing a medal of Mother Teresa to her stomach, made a tumor go away, or so she says. All the witnesses to this have since recanted. All the doctors have given a much better explanation of how she was cured, of the swelling and the growth and what the medicines were and so forth, but they're still stuck with it. They have to go ahead with this process because, which will lead to countless untold suffering in India, because it will appear to license the bogus charlatanry of shaman medicine and intercessory medicine rather than the real thing. All of this will have to be gone through, this awful display, in the name of faith. And I just happen to have watched it at every stage, and I can tell you, it's depressingly easy to get a religious rumor started. You can count on an enormous amount of pre-existing credulity among illiterate, frightened, ill-educated populations. There isn't a literate, written down, properly attested witness of any real sort in the Gospels. It is, and you may as well admit it and stick to it because it's what you're good at, it involves an act of faith. Second, on the matter of my moral question, yes, it's true that Doug Wilson said that tithing was something I couldn't do, but then, I'm not moving the goalposts here, I don't think I'd regard giving all my money to the new St. Andrew's Church as a moral act. The only challenge that I've had so far that I really couldn't get out of, I should share it with you, was I was told, well, you couldn't do this. You couldn't say, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. No, but nor could you, as people of faith. You wouldn't dare. It would be blasphemy for you to do it. There's only one person who can do that, even on your account. So with respect, ladies and gentlemen, I think both my challenges stand. It hasn't been shown that I couldn't be a moral person despite my unbelief, and it has certainly not been demonstrated that unbelief will guarantee you against, the belief will, I'll say it again, that unbelief will ensure you against wickedness. You mentioned things like apartheid and Nazism. Well, let me just run it by you. Partly this often comes up because people say, what about the crimes and wickednesses of the secular world? The apartheid system in South Africa was actually a creation of the Dutch Reformed Church. It was justified theologically as the giving of a promised land to one Christian religious tribe, in which everyone else was supposed to be hewers of wood and drawers of water. It wasn't until the Dutch Reformed Church, under pressure, agreed to drop their racist preachments of many years that the apartheid system could be dismantled. The dictatorship in Greece in 1967 to 74 was proclaimed by the Greek Orthodox Church as a Greece for Christian Greeks. The Russian Orthodox Church at present, maybe this is one of the churches you don't recognize as Christian, I don't know, but it's currently become the bodyguard of the Vladimir Putin dictatorship in Russia. They are now producing, the Russian Orthodox Church, actual icons with halos around them of Joseph Stalin for distribution to extreme Russian nationalists and chauvinists for whom the church has become the spiritual sword and buckler. In Nazi Germany, prayers were said every year on the Führer's birthday by order of the churches for his survival and well-being. The first concordat signed by Hitler and by Mussolini in both cases was with the Vatican. If you take out the words fascist from any account of the 1920s and 30s, any reputable historical account, and you insert the words Christian right wing or actually Catholic right wing, you don't have to change a word of the rest of the sentence. And the third member of the Axis, the Japanese empire was led by someone who actually claimed he was himself a god, and to whom everyone in Japan was a serf and had to admit his godhead and divinity. And it was said to all of them, where would we know without the emperor? How would we know what to do? How would we know what a right action was? Without him, there would be screwing in the streets. There would be chaos. No one would know their bearings. Without our God, we would be rudderless. Many Japanese people, in fact, it's pitiful to report, still actually believe that. Now, I want to say, in other words, that religion is the outcome of unresolved contradictions in the material world. That if you make the assumption that it's man-made, then very few things are mysterious to you. If you make the assumption that religion is man-made, then you would know why, it would be obvious to you why, there are so many religions. When you make the assumption that it's man-made, you will understand why it is that religion has been such a disappointment to our species, that despite innumerable revivals, innumerable attempts again to preach the truth, innumerable attempts to convert the heathen, innumerable attempts to send missionaries all around the world, that the same problems remain with us, that nothing is resolved by this, that if all religions died out, or all were admitted to be false, instead of, as all believers will tell you, only some of them are false. In other words, we're faced with the preposterous proposition that religion are either all of them true, or none of them true, or only one exclusive preachment is true. And none of these seem to me coherent, and all of these seem to be the outcome of a man-made cult. Assume that all of them were discredited at the same time, all of our problems would be exactly what they are now. How do we live with one another? Where indeed do morals and ethics come from? What are our duties to one another? How shall we build the just city? How shall we practice love? How shall we deal with the baser, what Darwin called the lowly stamp of our original origins, which comes not from a pact with the devil or an original sin, but from our evolution as well. All these questions, ladies and gentlemen, would remain exactly the same. Emancipate yourself from the idea of a celestial dictatorship, and you've taken the first step to becoming free. Thank you.
Dr. Craig, your closing argument, 5 minutes.
In my final speech, I'd like to try to draw together some of the threads of this debate and see if we can come to some conclusions. First, have we seen any good arguments tonight to think that God does not exist? No, I don't think we have. We've heard attacks upon religion, Christianity impugned, God impugned, Mother Teresa impugned, but we haven't heard any arguments that God does not exist. Mr. Hitchens seems to fail to recognize that atheism is itself a worldview, and it claims alone to be true, and all the other religions of the world false. It is no more tolerant than Christianity with respect to these other views. He asserts that he alone has the true worldview, atheism. The only problem is he doesn't have any arguments for this worldview. He just asserts it. So it seems to me that if you're going to have a worldview and champion it tonight, you've got to come to a debate prepared to give some arguments, and we haven't heard any. He did have an argument about evolution, but when I explained that, it actually turned out to be supportive of theism. Evolution actually provides evidence for the existence of a designer of the universe. So we've not heard any good arguments to think that atheism is true. Now, I presented 5 reasons to think that theism is true. And this is what God, or the God hypothesis, does give you. He asks, what does it give us? It explains a broad range of human experience, philosophical, ethical, scientific, historical, experiential. I find the attraction of the God hypothesis is that it is so powerful in making sense of the way the world is. For example, the God hypothesis explains the origin of the universe. Mr. Hitchens has completely dropped this point in tonight's debate when we saw that, in fact, scientific and philosophical evidence points to a beginning of the universe out of nothing, and therefore to a transcendent personal creator of the cosmos. The teleological argument, the fine-tuning that is established in the initial conditions of the universe, not to speak of in the biological complexity that then ensued. And again, Mr. Hitchens has dropped that in the course of the debate tonight. So we have a creator and an intelligent designer of the cosmos. Thirdly, the moral argument. We saw that without God, there are no objective moral values. And here Mr. Hitchens has consistently distorted the argument. He's portrayed the argument as, how would we know moral values if we didn't believe in God? We don't need to believe in a tyrant in order to find moral values. Unbelief doesn't produce wickedness. That is all irrelevant. The point is that there is no foundation on a naturalistic worldview for the moral values and duties that we both want to affirm. And he agrees with that. This is what he says, and I quote. He says, our innate predisposition to both good and wicked behavior is precisely what one would expect to find of a recently evolved species that is half a chromosome away from chimpanzees, primate, and elephant, and even pig societies show considerable evidence of care for others, parent-child bonding, solidarity in the face of danger, and so on. As Darwin put it, any animal whatever endowed with well-marked social instincts would inevitably acquire a moral sense or conscience as soon as its intellectual powers had become as well developed as in man. That is the sociobiological explanation of morality. The problem is that that moral sense that develops in pig societies, chimpanzees, baboons, and Homo sapiens is illusory on atheism, because there are no objective moral duties or values that we have to fulfill, and that's what the theist can offer Mr. Hitchens. And so I want to invite Mr. Hitchens to think about becoming a Christian tonight. Honestly, if he is a man of goodwill who will follow the evidence where it leads, all of the evidence tonight has been on one side of the scale. And he wants to affirm objective moral values, so why not adopt theism? The resurrection of Jesus has gone unrefuted. The argument is not that it's too improbable to be false. The argument is that you need a historically sufficient explanation to explain why the disciples came to believe this. And there isn't one apart from the empty tomb and appearances. It's not a matter of rumor because the empty tomb was public knowledge in Jerusalem. It would be impossible for Christianity to flourish in Jerusalem in the face of an occupied tomb. Finally, the immediate experience of God. If there's anybody watching or listening to the debate tonight who hasn't found God in a personal, experiential way, then I want to invite you as well to think about becoming a Christian. I became a Christian as a junior in high school, and it changed my entire life. And I believe that if you'll look into it honestly with an open mind and an open heart, that it can change your life as well.
Mr. Hitchens has yielded his time, and therefore we move to questions, and we are directing those questions to students tonight. I want to repeat something Dr. Hazen said: there are stupid questions. I want to add to it, we are uninterested in your opinions, only your questions matter to us. I don't know where the microphone is. Can we hear the first question? Each participant will answer every question.
Dr. Craig, Mr. Hitchens, thank you so much. It's been great listening to you both. My question is for Mr. Hitchens. Mr. Hitchens, in your book, God is Not Great, you say that, quote, there are 4 irreducible objections to religious faith, end quote. The third being that religious faith, quote, is both the result and the cause of dangerous sexual repression, end quote. So here's my question for you. Is it good that the Bible prohibits humans from having sex with animals? Or is that an example of dangerous sexual repression?
The allusion I was making was not to the man-made in the ordinary sense nature of religion, that you can tell from studying some of its codes that it's humans that are inventing it. That's why so many of the injunctions in the Old Testament are, as you quite rightly say, concerned with agriculture, shall we put it delicately. But it's more that it's men-made, that it's designed to keep women in subordination.
But could you answer the question? Do you think the Bible is right to prohibit humans from having sex with animals?
I don't know of any good advice about having sex with animals. In favor of it, I mean to say, look, there are things that if people do, incest is one, and cannibalism is another. If you do them, you'll die out. A society that permitted it would. There were societies in New Guinea that did practice cannibalism, and there's a terrible disease that you get called kuru if you do it, and it seems to be. If you like, there are some rules that are self-enforcing. That's not what when I was talking about sexual repression, I was talking about the enormous number of prohibitions on sex between men and women, and on the evident fear of female sexuality, and the superstitious dread, for example, of female menstrual blood. Things of this kind.
Dr. Craig, your assessment of that question and answer.
Well, I think the question illustrates that apart from God, whatever is in nature is right. There is no thing barred in nature if there is no sort of objective moral code. So the question is a good one because it illustrates that here is a guideline for sexual expression that is very good for human beings and not something that's meant to be repressive or harmful to human beings. In fact, the studies I've seen says that religious people have more fun with sex than people who are not religious, and it's actually shows that they are more sexually satisfied in marriage and so forth. So I think the question makes a good point.
I think I have to have another bite at this. This tempting cherry. You see, if it's true that, as I think it is, that nature is pretty indifferent, pretty callous, pretty random, then who is the designer? But many people say concerning the ban on homosexuality, for example, in the Old Testament, they'll say, well, homosexuality is against God's law and it's against nature's law. Well, in that case, why does nature see to it that so many people are born homosexual? Or, if you want to rephrase it, why does God have so many of his children preferring sex with their own gender? It doesn't help. It doesn't, in clarifying and elucidating this, it doesn't help to assume a supernatural authority. Whereas, if you look at the reasons given by Maimonides and the other sages for the practice of circumcision, it is precisely to dull and to blunt the sensation of an organ which I don't think even, well, I'll leave it there.
Our next question.
No, but it's explicitly designed, in other words, to reduce sexual pleasure, make it more of a painful duty than a celebration. When you ask for it.
I don't want to misrepresent myself. I was a student here and graduated. Somewhat by the skin of my teeth, but Mr. Hitchens, you stated that some of your most strongly stated arguments are that the results of religion, violence, death, destruction, the motivation being religion, discredit those who would promote a belief in God. However, I think there's an imbalance there in that the nuclear bomb was created by physicists and is the most demonstrable violence perpetrated on mankind. So I wonder how you respond to that.
Well, physics isn't an ideology. Physics isn't a belief system. It's a science.
Well, I think that would be subjective.
I mean, you could, any more than the Marie Curie discovering radium makes her practice morally different. I mean, it's not comparing like with like. What I'm talking about are specific religious injunctions to do evil, to mutilate the genitalia of children, for example, to take the pastor, Douglas Wilson, who Dr. Craig was just mentioning, with whom I crossed swords several times this year, recently in Dallas. I happened to be mentioning to him about the commandment to exterminate the Amalekites in one of our debates, and he said that commandment is still valid. If there were any Amalekites, it would be his job to make sure that they were all put to the sword. And some of the virgins left over for slavery, purposes better imagined perhaps than described. I think this is a very serious problem. I'm not taking refuge in the commonplace that sometimes religious people behave badly, that would discredit religion. That would be a very soft option. I'm saying there are specific biblical scriptural injunctions to do